What's up everyone, Jimmy Turner here from Money Meets Medicine. In this video, we're going to discuss how much you need to be saving each year to retire by the age that you want. I'm going to walk you through all the things you need to know to determine that, including a free calculator you can use to make it easy. All right, so the first person that we need to talk about is Philip Cooley. He was a professor at Trinity University. So he had this renowned in financial influence on what is called safe withdrawal rates. Famously, it became to be called the Trinity study. And his most notable work from this is now a cornerstone in retirement planning. Essentially what Cooley, Hubbard, and Waltz, the authors on this that published in 1998, were trying to show was how much money could you take out each year in retirement and rest reliably assured that it was going to last for 30 years during that retirement. They looked at numbers from 1926 to 1995. So you got to remember, this is a study that was performed back in the day, 30 years ago. That said, it was an important study that laid the foundation for what we can consider safe withdrawal rates today. And their work still has a lasting impact. So the 4% rule is one of the two things that came out of this. It's a super significant finding. Essentially what they said is that you could take out 4% from the savings that you created and that you save for retirement each year and rest reliably assured it was going to last those 30 years that they looked at. This became widely known as the 4% rule. The second thing that came out of that study that we're not really going to dive into for this particular video, but is worth mentioning, is asset allocation. Essentially, they showed that you continue to need to take risk when you are in retirement, meaning you can't just go to 100% bonds and 0% stocks. That in fact, if you do that, your chances of making it to 30 years during retirement and not running out of money become less and less likely. So asset allocation was an important finding in the study, but we're going to focus on that 4% withdrawal, which is shown here. So what they did is look at various asset allocations, and what they concluded was that a withdrawal rate of 4% per year, adjusted for inflation annually, would likely allow retirees to maintain their savings over a 30-year period. So that's why this became called the 4% rule, right? It makes sense. It suggests that withdrawing 4% of your initial retirement portfolio in the first year of your retirement and adjusting subsequently, you stand a good chance to have that money last through retirement. Because remember, the goal here is to not finish with the most money possible, is to not die poor. And so what this study showed is that if you took out 4%, you weren't going to die poor. You were going to have some money left for 30 years, which for the vast majority of people is going to be well more than they need for their average retirement. But that study was published in the 90s, right? So fortunately, Michael Kitzes and Bill Benjin, they looked at this as well, and their data included the 2008-2009 Great Recession. Really important because it included more data, but it was also more recent, and they found that the 4% rule actually held up pretty well. And that they found actually that the 4% rule really did hold up even during those really severe downturns in the market. They looked at it a little bit differently though, and in an interesting way. The study they showed highlighted the importance of sequence of return risk, which is essentially what happens when the market goes down immediately after you retire. And that is called sequence of return risk, or SOR, S-O-R-R. And so what they wanted to know was, what is the maximum amount that you could have withdrawn in your retirement portfolio and know that that money is going to last based on what happened immediately after you're retired. They looked at this all the way up through 2019, and it was called the SafeMAX is the term or the phrase that came out of this, which is essentially what is the maximum withdrawal rate you could safely take out your SafeMAX and know that that money was going to last for 30 years in retirement. So slightly different from that original Trinity study, but cool nonetheless, and showed similar findings. Essentially what they showed is that some years you could take out as much as 13%, shown here in the 1930s, which is insane. If you had $1 million portfolio, you could have taken out $130,000 in that year and been fine. Now, other years, 2008, 2009, didn't fare quite so well. And in fact, the lowest was in the 60s, where they showed that about a 4.25% withdrawal rate was what you could have stood to tolerate if you retired at that time. And so the goal isn't to take the most out, but what they did do is look at what is the maximum you could take out and your money would have lasted. So this study showed that the years where the market performed poorly after retirement, even in the most conservative years, the SafeMAX was around 4.25 or 4.5%, which really strengthened that original 4% rule number. If you want to be conservative and you want to make sure that money's going to last, you're going to end up wanting to take out around 4 to 4.5% when you first start withdrawing. And that's the number, the SWR, that we're going to pop into the calculator here in a minute. Worth mentioning is that if you plan on a traditional retirement age, let's say 60 years old or older, then that's where that 4% rule comes into play, right? You want to last 30 years till 90 because the average life expectancy right now is still much less than that. 4% is a pretty safe bet. But if you want to retire earlier, let's say before the age of 60 or 55, you're going to need to take out less potentially because you need the money to last longer. And so because of that, you might consider taking out 3.25 or 4% as a better estimate of your safe withdrawal rate because you need the money to last longer. These studies were based on 30 years, not 50. So we've got to take that into account. Now, the reciprocal from this is something really cool. It's called the 25X rule. So let me explain to you how this works, right? We've established that you can withdraw 4% from your portfolio that you've saved for retirement and rest pretty reliably assured that you'll be safe. Said differently, you can take your annual spending, how much you need each year in retirement, and multiply that by 25, and that's going to determine how much money you need to have saved in order to be financially independent and retire. Let's give an example. So if you had a $2.5 million portfolio, you took out 4%, that'd be $100,000 each year you could spend. Alternatively, if you told me, hey, Jimmy, I spend $100,000 per year in retirement, how much money do I need? I'd say, well, multiply that by 25. It's $2.5 million. That's how much money you need to retire right now. This is called the 25X rule, and it's reciprocal to the 4% rule. So it's built off of that, which is why it's important to understand both your safe withdrawal rate and the number one thing that you control when it comes to determining your annual savings rate and how much money you ultimately need is your spending. You spend less, you need less. In fact, we know that for every $10,000 that you spend in retirement is going to require $250,000 more or less depending on your spending. So if you spend $10,000 more in retirement, you're going to need $250,000 more saved for that retirement to withdraw 4% from. Said differently, if you spend $10,000 less, you need less money, $250,000 in your retirement savings in order to retire. So that's how that number impacts those things. Again, if you're going to retire early, you might take more like 3% out. That turns into a 33X rule. So if you told me, hey, Jimmy, I want to retire when I am 45, I'd say, well, hey, multiply your annual spending needs by 33. That's going to get you closer to the ballpark you need to make sure that that money's going to last. Yes, this is conservative, but at the end of the day, again, the goal is to not die broke, and being more conservative helps you accomplish that goal. So some take-home points here. The safe withdrawal rates are determined by how long you need that money to last, and you can adjust those withdrawal rates in retirement based on performance. So if the market goes gangbusters, you can, of course, take out more than 4%. If it goes down, you might need to take out less. The conservative goal, again, is to not die broke. So pick a safe withdrawal rate between 3 and 4.25 based on your retirement age. If you're retiring early, closer to 3. If you're retiring closer to 65, 4.25 is probably going to get the job done. So we've discussed the importance of your safe withdrawal rate number and how to determine that. Okay, so now you can place your SWR here in the calculator. You'll also understand that how much you need is determined by how much you spend annually. So what about the other variables? Well, one really important variable is how much you can expect to earn in the market. And in order to answer that, we need to understand market history. So let's take a quick dive into that so you can figure out how much money you need to put in for your anticipated interest rate into the financial freedom calculator. Here is a graph of the S&P 500. For those that aren't familiar, this is basically an index of the 500 largest company. It's based on the weight or how big those companies are in terms of their capital in the U.S. economy. So if you look at by year, you can see that in some years it returned as much as 40%, which is pretty crazy. And in the worst years, it went down by 30%, in 2008, 2009 being the most recent evidence of that, shown here on this graph. But this is annual, right? So if we're going to put in a calculator, what are our anticipated interest returns, our returns from the market over a longer period of time, we need to understand averages and what that looks like. So for the average, it's about 10%. That's what you're going to hear. For over the last 100 years, it's 10%. Over the last 50 years for the S&P 500, it's been 10 to 11%. But we've got to remember that this doesn't account for inflation. So if something costs you $100 today, a year from now, we know that it's going to cost us $102 or $103 because the average inflation rate is about 2 to 3% historically. So that 10% number increasing each year doesn't account for inflation. So said differently, how much money you need to live comfortably right now, right, to retire right now, is not how much money you're going to need 30 years from now. That's why you can take whatever you anticipate earning in the market and probably adjust that by 2 to 3%. So if we expect to earn 8, we probably need to pop into the calculator 5 or 6 in order to make today's dollars the same as what you see in that calculator. It'll be the same amount of money that you need because it does account for inflation. Important caveat is that while the average return for the S&P 500 has been 10% over the last 50 to 100 years, this doesn't include bonds in your portfolio. And we know that as you get closer to retirement, your asset allocation needs to involve some more fixed securities, bonds, because they are safer, they're more conservative, which as you get closer to retirement becomes more and more important because you don't want that volatility to be the same as when you're 30 and you're investing 90% in stocks, right? So 10% average for a pure equity portfolio using the S&P 500. However, we're probably not going to expect 10% as we get along because ultimately we're going to have more fixed assets like bonds in our portfolio. So that also drags down that anticipated interest rate we expect to get. So the 25x rule helps us determine how much we need to save to get to that goal. To account for inflation, we need to adjust the number, the anticipated interest rate on the calculator down for both asset allocations, including bonds, and also the inflation rate. So a good number that I tell people to pop into the calculator to start is 5 to 6%. Of course, you can adjust that based on your opinions and what you expect to earn in the market for your given portfolio. Remember, the 25x rule is based on how much you spend. So we know that the less you spend, the less you need. That does impact things in the calculator. So that last thing that we need to discuss is your annual spending because it's arguably the most important variable in the calculator. It's one you control the most. And so if we go back to that question, just from a very rough back of the napkin math, how do we figure out this number sort of situation? Just go back and look at your last 2 to 3 months of your credit card bills or your bank statements, figure out your average monthly spending, and then multiply that by 12. Of course, that'll give you your annual spending, but there's an important caveat here, which is that there are going to be some things you're spending money on right now that you won't in retirement. So say your kid's college education or your disability insurance or life insurance policies, because by the way, you should get rid of those when you get to financial independence and you can insure yourself. Disability insurance is the number one financial task for doctors to protect your income because your asset that is most important is the income earning potential you have. But once you have enough money to retire, you don't need disability insurance anymore. So we're not going to count that in our calculation because we don't think that we're going to be paying for disability insurance when we're retired. Other things you might take out, that mortgage, the auto payment, just figure out what is my annual spending now and subtract the things that you're going to be paying now that you won't be paying in retirement because you won't need that money then. Before we head out, don't forget you can get a free copy of the Physician Philosopher's Guide to Personal Finance over at moneymeetsmedicine.com. If you're a real book nerd, of course, you can go over to Amazon to pick up a physical copy if you want to leaf through those pages. You can also get an own occupation disability insurance quote at moneymeetsmedicine.com. So head on over there if you're looking for disability insurance. Your number one financial task as a physician is to secure your future earning potential through disability insurance. We're happy to help you with that over there. So now you know all of the information to use this calculator. The main variables here are the age you want to retire, your safe withdrawal rate, anticipated returns in the market, and how much you plan on spending in retirement. Click the link to download the Money Meets Medicine Financial Freedom Calculator. It's in the description of this video as well. And leave a comment to let us know how much you need to be saving each year to retire by the age that you want. All right, everybody. See you in the next one.